So, full disclosure, this is actually my second take at this because I had some technical issues with the first take. So, I had started off with a joke. Starcraft sucks! You know, a little bombshell, get people out of the video. You know how it goes. But the truth is, you're probably expecting me to tell you that Starcraft is the best game ever made, ever. No. Good core story, middling story presentation, good core gameplay, really bad gameplay presentation. This was actually a very irritating game to play at a certain point because the game was demanding a level of quality of skill, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. And it was just so irritating to play that it became frustrating just trying to get the game to do what I wanted it to do. Everybody talks about the horrible pathfinding, which not only has issues with corners and stretches all units onto a line, but in some cases just can't really even go anywhere. Like those freaking ramps, which the game is in love with. And of course we got the isometric view, so there's corners all over the place, so that sucks. You can only select 12 units at a time. If you have multiple units that have abilities selected in one group, you have to individually select them to do stuff. Selecting an individual unit is actually irritating because of how tiny the selection boxes are. There's just so many little irritations all over the place with the interface and with the controls and with the pathfinding and with several elements of how the core game actually works. Even like the very way some of the units move, like the Ultralisks or the Goliaths or the Dragoons or any of that crap. And it's just so irritating. And yet, one of the things that is going through this and reviewing this really reminded me of is why StarCraft exploded the way it did. I have been playing RTS games since Warcraft 1 and Command & Conquer 1. I've mentioned before, I don't really remember which one came first for me, because both of them were a rental from a place back when I was in early high school, right? So, you remember rentals? I'm old. So, I was going through and I rented them, and it was like, oh, this is my bag. And it's funny because both those games kind of suck in hindsight. But I mentioned the older RTSs because StarCraft was a sea change. Only be able to select 12 with one group? Try 9. Or 1. You can only, you have issues with pathfinding. StarCraft pathfinding was such a huge leap forwards that it's hard to even think of with historical context. In StarCraft, if you select something to move, there's a pretty good chance it will eventually get there. It may have issues, assuming it can get there, but it will eventually reach its destination. In older games, pathfinding would, in some cases, just quit. In fact, we showed this off during the Dawn of War review. Remember that? Where the pathfinding just straight up stopped and gave up. As unlike in StarCraft, where they will try, like they'll keep re-examining. Like if they run into an obstacle, rather than they'll recalculate, right? Like the GPS will go, hang on, okay, go this way instead. So it's really bad, and it actively gets in the way of the game, but it's so much better than what was before. And this is true across the board. I'm not going to go down the whole list. One of the biggest things that irritated me about StarCraft, and the reason we finally just kind of started being like, let's just get on with this, was the kill-all missions. You remember those, right? Wipe out, find every little tiny last building speck on the map in order to win. Those are irritating, sloggy, and boring, right? Remember when every mission was like that? Because they all were? So, yeah. Well, obviously StarCraft has some issues and doesn't fully hold up from a modern perspective, which is how we review games. It's so easy to see why it took off and why it hooked so many people, myself included. Playing this was so much better than the RTSs I played before it. And it also had a very strong story focus. RTSs had story, but I mean, Mario Brothers 1 has story. Story focus is when a game has a large amount of real estate, both in terms of time and in terms of what you're actually interacting with in the game, devoted towards its story, right? StarCraft had a main plot line that went across the 3 factions, each faction being different, by the way. I forgot to mention that in the gameplay thing. They weren't just carbon copies of each other, or barely different with a few stats, like in, say, Age of Empires 1, for example, or Civilization 2. No, they were completely different factions, which played differently and had completely different units. And there was 3 of them, and you played them sequentially as part of one story, instead of this story or this story, which are mutually exclusive. Story focus, big campaign, vastly improved gameplay. Of course the game took off. Even the setting is fascinating. StarCraft is, no joke, one of my favorite settings to this very day, even though it's had so little exposure, just because I think it's such a fascinating setting. All the little details, right? All the little flavor tidbits. I love it. I love it. And I should probably mention, for those of you who don't actually check the reviews, the story scored really well. It was the gameplay that was flagging. I think it was like 52% ratio on the gameplay, which means 52% of all positives, of all points were positive. So still net positive, but only barely. A lot of negatives and a lot of positives. They tried a lot of stuff. A lot of experimental stuff. In fact, what's so weird for me personally, going through StarCraft 1, I kept recognizing missions from Warcraft 3 and from StarCraft 2, where you can see they took the same mission design and, you know, like, okay, hang on, we got better tech, better engine, more experience, let's try it again. And almost universally, the later missions were better executions of the earlier ideas, but the ideas come back to here. This was the experimental one. This is the one that tried things. This is the game changer. This is the difference between an innovator and a codifier. An innovator almost always reviews worse because they're trying out new stuff. They have no idea what they're doing. They're still trying to figure things out. A codifier has the advantage of knowing what they're doing and sets it in stone. So Warcraft 3, for example, would probably review much better than Starcraft 1, just because they have all that extra experience at their back. Now, I don't know, we haven't reviewed Warcraft 3, and I keep kind of holding off on that because I refuse to touch Reforged for many reasons. So we'll see if that ever happens. But next we're going to go ahead and try out Starcraft 2, and we're going to see how many of those lessons they took forward, gameplay-wise, in order to improve upon the gameplay. I have a question for you right now. As of this moment in time, the highest scoring gameplay we've ever given to any game is Diablo 3. Now, Diablo 3 had years of development and an expansion and a huge amount of support and backing to turn itself from the kind of mess it was at launch into the best gameplay scoring game we've reviewed so far. StarCraft 2 will have 3 functional expansions, or 3 campaigns, if you will, to really build into that, and the co-op mode and some of the other stuff that's come out since then. So it's got some of the same advantages, but do you think it's in striking range of the king? See you next time.